Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday again to you. It's becoming an old thing, but anyway, I enjoy being here with you on Wednesday. And tonight, I am totally out of the Bible. Well, not really totally, but I mean, we won't be doing any Bible scriptures tonight. We'll be going through what I would call Leonardo and the missing years. It's really an interesting story of Leonardo's life. And to begin with, let me go back 3 or 4 weeks ago. We were doing Daniel, more like 5 or 6. From Daniel, we moved to talking about the Watchers. And in talking about the Watchers, we began to look at other sources other than the actual Bible. Daniel 4 has 3 different passages in Daniel 4 that deal with the characters called the Watchers. And so we went to the book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees, which are non-canon books that are found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so from there, I began to talk to you about the idea of the angels who came down. And in the course of angels coming down, I got to admit 2 more people. Admit all. Okay. So in going through this, one of the things that came out was the fact that in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, chapter 5, we meet the characters, the lineage of Adam through his son. And going through that.
Yeah.
Are you okay? All right. So back to the story. So anyway, in the course of time, as we're going through this, Genesis chapter 6 deals with B'nai Elohim, or what we called the sons of God. But they were also known by other names. They were known in the Aramaic, they were called Urim. And that's how they would be written in the book of Daniel, as the Urim. And so it took me a while to trace back and come to the conclusion. Now, the Enoch that I'm talking about was the first book of Enoch. There were actually 3 made. The first one came during the time when the Essenes were living in the Qumran area down in the Jordan Valley. The second book was written just after the fall of the city of Jerusalem, and it was written in Greek. The third one was written 300 years after that, and it was written in a Slavic language. But there were 3 of them, all dealing with what we would call the Apocrypha. And so we talked about the Apocrypha and all that goes with it. Now, as the story goes on, we wanted to know what the Nephilim were, and we found out that they were children, the B'nai Noach, or B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, and they were called the Watchers. But when I went and looked up the orders of the angels, Rambam has one that there are 10 orders. Ramban, Nachmanides, said there were only 7 orders of angels. And there were a couple other sites where I went and looked, and all of them had the same thing, but none of them had the idea of the Watchers. They were on those sites. So we have these characters, which we call sons of God. And the question then began to go through my mind, where did they come from? Now, Jared, which was the 6th son of our man Adam, his real name would have been Yored, and Yored means to come down. And so it's understood that during the days of Jared, Yored, these beings came down from the heavens. Now, according to the book of Enoch, they came down from the 5th heaven. And most of the commentators agree that there are 7 heavens. So they came from one of those heavens. Now, in the story itself, we begin to substantiate the fact that these angels, when they procreated with the women, created for us what we would call Nephilim, giants. In fact, the word giants appears a great deal when we get into the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, well, not Leviticus, but Numbers and Deuteronomy. In all of those, we found ourselves wondering, are the giants the same thing as the Nephilim? Now, according to the Bible, Noah, when he built his boat, did not take a Nephilim with him. So the Nephilim would have died. And as the Midrashic writings and commentators relate, they became what we would know as the demons. Now, after this, we began to really look into some of the other things that were going on. But from that, I began to find myself questioning, are the giants, are the Nephilim, are those the characters that we find in the book of Zechariah, chapter 5, which deals with spaceships? Are they the characters that we might find if we were reading the book of Ezekiel as the NASA scientists read it? The NASA scientists, as they were reading it, they began to notice that this, well, Ezekiel 1, they called a lunar lander, although it was going in the other direction. So I began to start studying, and I really hadn't gone very far when I came across one of my favorite characters, and that was Leonardo da Vinci. If I was going to study a character's life, his was the one I wanted to follow. And it just so happens he led me into aliens. And so I picked him to share with you tonight. And I picked his paintings that I'm going to share with you tonight. Now, I'm not going to share all of them, but I'm going to give you a sampling of some of the things that are hidden. And I express the word hidden very much because they are out of sight. I'm going to try to talk to you a little bit about art. My ability to draw art was to doodle. I never got into painting or any of those other things. My son did, but I can't take credit for his artwork. I can only take credit for my doodles. In our story then, Leonardo was born to a gentleman from Vinci. He was a notary. He met a 15-year-old servant girl that he cohabited with and created Leonardo. Leonardo was illegitimate. But in that day and time, illegitimacy was not what we would call something, well, it was to be shunned, but at the same time, it was very common. Some of them became famous as archbishops. Some of them became famous as in politics or other things. Leonardo himself was denied schooling. Now, he could go to a class to teach you how to use an abacus, to learn math. But as far as all of the rest, Leonardo was self-taught. Now, he also had a disability. He was left-handed. Now, left-handed people, I being one of them, found ourselves very difficult to write. And so we had problems. My first and second grade teacher corrected me. Every time I grabbed a pencil with my left hand, she smacked it with a ruler. I think she thought she was a nun. But anyway, go back to the story. So left-handed, you oftentimes are writing across your picture or across your paper, and you're smudging it if you had ink. And even a pencil, carbon smudges. But he found himself working in a medium that he found exciting, and it wasn't writing. It was art. It was drawing. Now, from the days that he was old enough, he always went out and he looked around and he investigated. He investigated nature, the trees, the grasses, the flowers, the water, the rocks. Anything that had to do with nature became part of his understanding. In fact, by the time he was finished, and I'll show you some examples, by the time he was finished, he probably knew more than if he would have gone to the academies that they had presented, because he was so engrossed and so entrenched. He began to look at leaves, different kinds of leaves. Now, he didn't call them conifers or deciduous trees. He just simply began to draw them. And he began to notice the veining. He began to notice all the little things, the pine cones, the seeding process, all that went into it. So by the time he was 14 years old, he was quite proficient, and he had created for himself notebooks filled with drawings that he had made of the things that he had seen, the water rushing down through a creek, all of the stuff that we would normally think of and take for granted. He didn't take any of it for granted. That became part of who he was. Now, being that way, he found himself growing up, and his father, by the time he was 14, was able to get him into the notary school like his dad was, and like his grandfather, and like his great-grandfather. In fact, all of his family were known to be notaries. But his dad realized that that was not where he was going. And so he never took him for that purpose. But at 14, he took him to Milan. And there in Milan, he indentured him, or made him an apprentice to one of the men who was great with metals, great with painting. So he began to learn the art of painting. He will actually make improvements to that art. He'll actually develop new paint colors to that art. He will become quite proficient in it. But this is only his beginning. He'll also work with metals. He'll begin to create things, sculpt things. All will become a part of who he becomes. And not only that, he was quite good at it. In fact, he will become so proficient that his professor, that his advisor, will ask him to leave. And so he'll leave and he'll go to another city, Florence. And there in Florence, what's he going to do? He is going to apprentice himself again. But here he's going to be in a city where there's constant artistic work. There's metal workers, there are leather workers, there are artists. All of these were around him, and he began to dabble in all of them. He became quite proficient. In fact, he would be known as a polymath person. Now, when we think of polymath, we think of somebody who has a lot of math skills, which is true. But a polymath person is one who would be called a painter, a draftsman, a musician, an engineer, a scientist, a theorist, a sculptor, and an architect. He would be the problem solvers. In fact, he would take all of his skills and he would solve difficult problems that nobody else was able to reason through. Again, he collected all of his information. He put them in notebooks. Now he began to add to it writing. And out of all of his writings, there was one book, codex, they call it, of 70 pages with drawings and information in it. Now that book, 400 plus years old, sold in the open market. It only cost Bill Gates $350 million to buy it. That's cheap because it's now worth 4 times that amount. But he has created a situation where you can go online and you can actually look at the book and those things that are there. Now, to back up a second, while Da Vinci was at, oh, by the way, Da Vinci is not really his name. Vinci is the name of the city where he was born. Da means in, so Leonardo in Vinci was born. And so in our story then, he lived there, and when he was 14 years old, he went exploring and found a cave. Now, he writes nothing about the cave except to say that he found this cave and he went into it. You'll not find any information anywhere. You'll not find any descriptions. But he will go into this cave. 2 years later, he comes back. Now, what did he do? How did he survive for those 2 years that he was gone? No information, nothing to tell us what's going on inside. It's presupposed, or it's thought, that he, when he entered into the cave, found himself in a portal. Some would call it a stargate, a way of traveling through time. Whether he moved forward through time or backward through time, nobody's sure. Or did the stargate take him to another planet, another place? He doesn't write about it. He doesn't tell about it. But when he's finished with that, I think one thing that becomes very obvious, and that's the fact that he's not what he used to be. He seems to now have more insight and more understanding than he ever had. Now, he's going to do lots of different kinds of things. In fact, he's going to have a career for a period of time. He'll move to Milan, where he works for what will eventually become the Duke of Milan. Now, the Duke of Milan was one who protected his land, so to speak, and advanced in other people's land. He was a warlord. Now, Da Vinci needed financing. So Da Vinci went there and asked him if he could work for him as a draftsman and create for him weapons of war. Now, to us, weapons of war seems very modern. In fact, he's going to create some of the weapons that 400 years later will become part of the arsenal of the United States and other countries. He will create the design for a Black Hawk helicopter. He'll create the design for a tank. He creates the designs for lots of howitzers, mobile units. Now, many of them did not work as we would say work today. He created a parachute. Remember, he also created the pair of wings and a body that could slide in and out of a glider. Lots of things that he created were yet still futuristic. Now, after that, he found himself moving again. And in moving again, he found himself in various places. And one of those places was Rome. Now, Rome was just down the road from Milan and Florence, and that's where he went. And he worked in Rome, and he found himself at times underneath the Vatican, in those catacombs that if you've ever gone to Rome, you know the catacombs that are underneath the city that were filled with bones. One of those places, he found himself able to begin to dissect cadavers. Up until that time, nobody had ever really understood the human body. But as he began to take these bodies apart, he began to recognize the ligaments, the muscles. He began to recognize the joints, everything about the human. He took the heart apart. He took the liver, the kidneys, all of that became part of his drawings. He advanced the medical field hundreds of years by just what he did. But also what he did was totally illegal. And it could have cost him his life, because the human life was more, even though it was dead, was more valuable, according to the Vatican, than for anybody to cut it up. But he did. Now, at the same point in time, he's also still dabbling in nature, learning as much as he can. Having spent time there, he moves, and he moves to France, where he eventually goes to work for the King of France, Francis I. Now, while he's with Francis I, he again continues to sculpt, he continues to paint, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. And we're going to talk about the fact that he created the first robot. By robot, he created a mechanical lion, a lion that moved independently, a lion whose legs worked, whose head turned, whose mouth opened, a lion. Scared everyone, but he gave it as a present to the king for all the things that he did for him. Leonardo continues to unravel mysteries that defy description. I want to hopefully share with you. There it goes. Now, if I can hit slideshow, and now we're here. I want to show you a few slides. These slides, again, Leonardo is way ahead of his time. And I'm going to talk about art that is beyond what any man today can do. We don't know how he accomplished what he did, nor have we even begun to scratch the surface. But in our story, as we're going through this, we're going to talk about Leonardo's projects. This is an example, and actually it's a collage of all of the different kinds of things that he worked on. He works on people. He worked on fetuses. And again, imagine how that would look. He's going to work on things like stairways, and we'll see those. He works on water wheels. He works on all of that. Next, I want to begin to talk about his paintings. Now, this one is called the Annunciation. Gabriel on the left came to Mary to announce that she was pregnant, that she would have the Christ child. Simple painting, but profound. Many of his paintings were painted over other paintings. And so they began to look at his painting from a technological point of view and looked at what was beneath it. Well, as they put a black light to the painting, Gabriel disappears. The rest of the painting is fine, but Gabriel is no longer there. Take the black light away, Gabriel returns. How? I don't know. There was no such thing as a black light, X-rays, all of those things that we normally think of. And yet at the same point in time, his painting did it. Everybody knows her. This is Mona Lisa. It's the one painting he never gave away. He held on to it for 16 years until he died. Then it became a part of the estate. Now, Mona Lisa is so famous because of her smile. Her smile is quite different than any other painting. In the Renaissance art, the women were painted with a straight face, no smile. If there was anything, it was lips turned down. In the case of men, the same thing. But if you look at her lips, you begin to see something else. You see Leonardo's painting, there are two sets of lips in his picture. The first set was Mona's. She's on the right. The second set was the guy with a beard and balding. That's Leonardo. So the curved lips were impossible to think about until the painting was made. And in the painting, the left side of his face disappeared, and Mona became Mona. Oh, by the way, she also, when he originally painted her, she had a bonnet on. Quite interesting. I want you to look at the background in the picture. I want you to look at the horizon. Do you notice the horizon on both sides of the picture? The horizon's wrong. And the reason the horizon doesn't bother your eyes is because Mona distorts the picture. She doesn't let you see the whole. You only get to see the part. Notice her hands also. Her hands are crossed. In the original Mona, her right hand was sitting on the chair arm, the armrest. Both of them were, just like her left arm is now. In fact, when it was originally painted, it looked like Mona was getting up out of her chair. Layer upon layer upon layer were used. 16 years he worked on this painting. 16 years. Smiles, horizons, animals. Oh, yeah. There's another thing that he did that was technically different. He took the picture of Mona Lisa, and again, he's left-handed. So he put together the left hand. Let me go back. You see her leaning a little bit. I want you to notice her left eye because he's going to create a second picture opposite and lay it across half of her face so that you have the right eye from the one picture and the left eye from the other picture. Whoops, went the wrong way. When it's laid across itself like that, this is what you get. Darth Vader. Now, you can't see it. It's something that happened as they began to notice his writing. As I told you, he's left-handed. In order to take care of not smudging the paper, he wrote backwards. Instead of writing from left to right, he wrote from right to left. He mirrored the words. So if you wanted to read what he had, you had to look into a mirror to actually get a clear picture of it. And the same technique was used in his paintings. Now, this is only one of his paintings. He does it in others. So it's going to be a rather interesting, but this is the picture that can be created by putting Mona together twice. St. John the Baptist, another interesting painting. Now, when he was alive, they didn't have electrical lamps. They only had candles, dim lighting. And if you look at John, you can see all around him is black. You can see a faint cross going up. This is where he began a new technique, where he began to blur the edges of a painting so that you couldn't tell where it ended and where the backdrops began. Now, as you're looking at this, he points up, so you know he's pointing to God. If you were to turn off all the lights except one dim light in the room, John would disappear. He would only reappear when there's enough magnification for him to be seen. Here he is again on a folded piece, left side, right side. Right side is, or left side is the original. The right side is the part of him that was folded over. Only this time he doesn't match head to head. He's actually down at the bottom of the picture. But notice the circled area. What does that look like? Doesn't look like anything we have. And again, was he pointing at God, or was he just simply pointing at the heavens? That's the question that people have. Here's another one. I picked the Virgin Mary and her child because this is an unfinished painting. He never wanted to finish it. And then I began to wonder. Now, if you look at the color, all the bottom half is total color. The top half is indistinguishable in many places because of the matted background that's the tan. This just shows you how Leonardo was putting one picture on top of another. And so in this case, again, he created the Virgin Mary and the child. Why does he do that? That's the Catholic Church. That's his background. The Renaissance is all about that. As you begin to look, you can see that there's a triangle. You can see the three men bowing. Those are the Magi. Then all around were those who came to watch. And so Mary is in the middle, creating that perfect triangle, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, as they would look at it. But I want you to look to the top now. If you do, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, behind the trees on the right, you will see horses and men in combat. I couldn't blow it up any bigger because it wouldn't fit on my page. But I want you to look over to the left side, and you find a stairway that goes to nowhere. Well, actually, the stairway does. There's this darker or this lighter colored paint that was over the top of it. If you look through that paint, you will actually see that the top is finished. And what's more, can you see by the second tree, the tree on the right or on the left, a tall column? On the top of the column is a lotus flower. Now, a lotus flower is not what you would normally think of, but the lotus flower takes us back to Egypt. You see, the lotus flower is the sign of creation, the sign of birth, new birth. So here you have a lotus flower, a pyramid-like building. You're talking Egypt. You're talking idolatry. You're talking war on the other side. But yet we watch Christ in front. Some have assumed, and maybe rightfully so, that the pagan temple is rising out of Christianity. That the temple is literally going up. Why would that be? Leonardo's not the only one who did strange things. This was a wall in a monastery that's found in Europe. As you can see, the title of the picture is The Moon. Do you notice anything about the moon? Doesn't look like the moon that we would normally think of. I don't think of jet propulsion behind the moon. And I don't think of the man in the moon sitting in the middle of a spacecraft. Now, this was drawn and painted on a wall in the 14th century. The 15th century, the Madonna with the saint. They highlighted it for you so you wouldn't miss it. Mary, the taller boy was John, the littler one was Jesus. But behind her shoulder, you can see somebody smudged the painting. Until you get closer and you begin to see, by the time you look at the third slide, you begin to see the fact that that was not a smudge. And you also notice that the man standing there beside her right shoulder or her left shoulder is looking up, not at her, not at the Christ child, but is looking up. Aliens have been around for a long time if we choose to believe what we see in art. Now, I only talked about those particular centuries. But you can find the same kind of idea all the way through history. It's only been in the last 100 years that aliens were considered something that we shouldn't talk about or shouldn't study, because they changed the way we view things. The Catholic Church has a firm dealing with that. There are no such things as aliens, because if there was, then we would have to identify the fact that Jesus didn't die for the sins of the people on the earth and not the people in space. But at the same point in time, if you went to New Mexico, you would find an observatory that had a radio telescope and a regular telescope pointed into the sky to look for and to listen to for sounds. 2 Catholic bishop scientists occupy that building. Even the Catholics are looking up. So as it begins to change how we view the world and our universe, I find myself going all the way back to Genesis chapter 6 and asking myself the question, are we talking about angels or are we talking about aliens? Remember last week when I talked about the fact that the technology to build the pyramid, the idea of being able to look through the Queen's chamber and look out and see Orion, and behind it, the Pleiades, and behind that, Arcturus, the North Stars. Somebody had to craft that. And for the whole to be correct, it would have been built 9,400 years ago. Not 6,000, not 5,000. Were there civilizations here before the one we're living in? Interesting question that I have no answer for. But I just thought it was nice to share with you what I'm actually seeing. So let me leave this for a second. I hope I can. Yeah, now I can. My shared screen has stopped. Okay. Talk to me. What do you think?